Hi everyone, it's Ben from Trekitt and I'm out here on Birch Common today with Harry behind the camera to talk to you a little bit about waxing. No, not that waxing or this waxing. Greenland waxing. So Greenland wax is really useful for your Fjällräven G-1000 products, and over the course of this video we'll go through a bit of a how-to on how to wax different Fjällräven products. So both jackets and trousers. Might be waxing the jacket today, probably not going to wax these trousers. I've got another pair that I prepared earlier. But we'll go over how to Greenland wax, a few tips and tricks, and a few sort of do's and don'ts when it comes to Greenland waxing, and just generally why you should be waxing your Fjällräven G-1000 products. So first off, why should you be waxing your Fjällräven G-1000 products? Got a box of the wax here. Greenland wax is really useful for adapting the weather resistance of your G-1000 garments. G-1000 as a material, so most Fjällräven products will have some G-1000 on them, but not all. G-1000 is the only material from Fjällräven that you can wax, so items like their keb trousers and things like that that have got stretchy soft shell sections, you can only wax the non-stretch G-1000 parts of the fabric. But anyway, the G-1000 material is naturally sort of wind resistant, but the application of Greenland wax will help it become more wind resistant and more water resistant. Doesn't make it proof by any stretch of the imagination. You will still get wet if you're out for extended periods of time in wet conditions, but the wax being impregnated into the outer of the fabric will help with water repellency and also adapting the fabric, making it a little bit better to deal with differing weather conditions. It also helps with the durability of G-1000. G-1000 is already a very durable fabric. Being a polycotton blend, it's highly abrasion resistant and just generally quite hard wearing. But applying layers of wax over things like stitching and just over the entirety of the jacket or trousers, whatever item you've got, it's also usable on rucksacks and things, will make the item a little bit more durable as well. There are three main methods that you can use for applying Greenland wax and doing the melting part of the wax to your Fjällräven G-1000 garments. You'll probably see one of them here. So, got an iron. Option two, which is another one that we can go for, is a hairdryer. So all of these options do require heat to be applied to the wax to effectively melt the wax into the outer surface of the fabric and basically impregnate it into the fibres. There is also a third option, which is using a stove. You can also use an open flame, but that gets quite tricky. A stove is a little bit more controllable. But we will go into that one as a bit of an aside because it's my least preferred method and is a little bit more tricky, and you've also got the chance of burning yourself a little bit easier. So that one is one to take with a little bit of a pinch of salt. Okay, so option one, the iron, is really straightforward to use. My mum's going to be really proud of me for telling you guys out there how to iron. She's so proud. The iron makes it really straightforward to melt the wax into trousers, jackets, anything that you can lie over an ironing board or a flat surface very easily. Very easy to apply. Gets a little bit trickier if you're waxing things like rucksacks and things that have got more curves, more nooks and crannies to them. The important thing with an iron though is to make sure that you don't get the iron too hot. Greenland wax melts at around 60 degrees. Between sort of 55 and 60 degrees is usually where it melts, so you don't need the iron very hot at all. You can run it on sort of a cool setting, and then if that's not quite melting the wax, crank it up a little bit. But realistically, you would rather have a cooler iron that takes a little bit longer to iron the wax in, rather than using a really hot iron that makes the wax very runny, which can then force it all the way through onto your ironing board, something like that. Don't really want to do that today because this is Harry's mum's ironing board, and we don't really want to make it all waxy. So you've got to make sure that if you're using the iron, that you don't turn the heat up too high. So moving on to option two, and my actual preferred method for applying Greenland wax and then melting it into the surface is to use a hairdryer. This is my own hairdryer from home. Otherwise, I tend to use it to apply wax to my moustache. But with the hairdryer, what we're really looking to do is apply a little bit more of directional heat to the items. So you can, if you've got an attachment like this, you can really get into some of the smaller areas along stitch lines and get a little bit more precise with it. Otherwise, you can just use a slightly wider surface area. The hairdryer works very well for pretty much everything, whether that be jackets, trousers, or onto rucksacks and things, because on rucksacks, you haven't got a nice flat surface that you can iron over. A hairdryer applies that heat a little bit more directionally so you can get into the little nooks and crannies much, much better. And finally, option three, which I alluded to earlier, is my least preferred method, and that will be using a stove or an open flame of some description. Stoves, if you are using flame as your sort of heat source, are the preferred method because they're a lot more controllable. You know, you can turn the heat right down on them and you know you're going to get a fixed height flame. If you are out and about, if you're doing a bit of bushcraft and you're out in the woods and you need to wax your garments, things like that, you can use an open fire, but because they're a little bit less predictable, you can be more likely to burn yourself, so you've got to be a little bit more careful with this method. But there is also a few tips and tricks that we can do with the stove method to hopefully help improve your experience with that. One last thing with the stove method, there is an alternative that can be an option to use, which is a little bit safer than holding your garments over a direct flame, because you're more at risk of burning some precious digits or melting a hole in your G-1000 garments. So what you can do as an alternative is you can boil some water in a pot on your stove, make sure it's nice and boiling so that the pot is nice and hot underneath, and then you can effectively use the weight of the water and the heat of the water to iron across the top of your garments to melt it in a little bit better. As a bonus, you also get a nice cup of tea out of it at the end, and who doesn't like a nice brew? So now onto the actual demo of using some Greenland wax. First off, this is what Greenland wax actually looks like. It looks much like a block of soap, and if you treat it a little bit like that, it makes life a little bit easier. So when applying Greenland wax, it's much better to apply lots of thin layers rather than one very thick built up layer. So you want to be applying even pressure across the entirety of the garment or rucksack that you're waxing. And just making sure that you're applying enough pressure, but not enough that it makes the motion jerky or you're leaving a very thick layer of wax onto it. So you can use the corner of the wax just to spread across the trouser in a nice even spread. And you want to be making sure you cover as much as you want to wax of the trouser. And as I say, lots of thin layers makes a very big difference rather than one big built up layer. Thin layers will then penetrate into the fibers a little bit quicker and will last a little bit longer rather than one big thick layer, which will take longer to melt, and it's just a little bit wasteful with the wax. So once you've finished applying a thin layer of wax, remember you will have to come back in and repeat this process a few times. The next step that you want to do is then apply heat. So for this one today, because it's a little bit better for the video, I'm going to use an iron. I'm pretty sure Harry ran the extension lead over to the tree over there that we plugged into. So I'm just going to turn this guy on, wait for it to heat up a minute, and then we can show you the difference that it makes when you apply a little bit of heat to the jacket or trousers. Okay, so once you've applied the wax, it will look a little bit patchy and a little bit waxy, unsurprisingly, but this will fade back in and you'll get a nice even finish as long as you've applied the wax in a nice even layer. So with the iron, it's pretty straightforward. It's just like ironing your trousers or jacket normally. So you're just applying a little bit of heat over the top of the item. Mum might not be quite as proud of my ironing technique here. I'm sure she'll have some pointers for me after this video. But what you're looking for is that the wax melts itself into the surface nicely. And you're just going to be ironing over everywhere that you can see wax and melting it back in and just applying that heat nice and evenly so that it melts into the trouser. And you should be able to see now, as long as it's not too contrasty out here, that that wax has melted really nicely back into the trouser. And then after that, you're just going to be rinsing and repeating, or waxing and repeating. So you're going to be going over again and just waxing a little bit more thoroughly just to apply a few layers to build up. And then once you've done that, the trousers will be nice and water repellent again. So after we've seen the ironing method there, I'll now show you how to apply heat with a hairdryer. Super straightforward. It's just moving the hairdryer across the surface after you've waxed it. Couldn't be simpler, and you can see really easily with the hairdryer once you've melted the wax in, and you can move on across to another part of the jacket or trousers that you're waxing. And then the final method will be applying heat with a little stove that we've got here. I've got a little Soto stove, but pretty much anything with some sort of heat control will work because you don't necessarily need a roaring flame coming out of your stove to do this. You just need a nice gentle flame with a little bit of heat. Cool, so now that we've applied a little bit of wax just to this pocket here, just to show you how we do that. The stove method you do have to be a little bit more careful with, as I mentioned earlier. So because you are working with an open flame and you're going to be moving something that is potentially flammable over the top of it along with your precious digits, you want to make sure that you're being extra safe with this. So I've just got a little stove here from Soto, as I mentioned before. So I'm just going to light this first. Just got to turn this guy on. And you don't need that flame absolutely roaring for this. You can just have a nice gentle flame there. And what you're going to be doing with the garment, rather than turning the stove upside down, which is a bit of a no-no, you're going to leave the stove as is, and then we're going to be moving the trousers or other item that you'd be waxing over the top of it, starting about 30 centimeters away, maybe even a little bit more. You can always move your way down. It's much easier to have it a little bit too cool away from the flame and move it a little bit closer, rather than moving it too close, either burning yourself or singeing your garment as well, which you really don't want to do. What you're looking to do, a little bit of an awkward spot I've chosen to do it with, because I've done it on the top of the trouser leg here. But what you're looking to do is hold it about 30 centimeters away, if I can stop it from flipping there, and you're just moving it across the line of the stove and just looking to double check to see how that wax is melting. I need to go a little bit closer. I'm just going to be moving it across. You don't want that heat in the same spot. Just moving it back and forth and just checking just to see as that wax is just starting to melt there. This method isn't the easiest, partially because you can't see what the wax is doing. You have to take the trousers, in this case, off the heat just to have a look and see how it's melting. So it's just starting to melt in just here a little bit. But because we're outside and there is a little bit of a breeze, you do have to just be mindful of where you're melting that wax. And you don't want to get too close, and you definitely don't, I've got my hand under here, I definitely don't want to be getting that any closer to the flame than I absolutely need to. So you're just going to be moving this across, just getting a little bit of heat there, and just going there. So that now is a mostly melted wax there. So I'm actually going to finish this off with an iron because I've got it there, because this method I don't actually like personally, but it does work. So there is one variation of the stove method that you can use. Success can be a little bit limited with it, but it is a little bit safer than just using the direct open flame. And as a bonus, you do get a cup of tea out of it at the end, which is ideal. So I've just boiled some water here, and I've got my pot now. So I've got, this pot is still full of lovely boiling water. So the bottom of this pot is nice and hot, it's fairly flat. So what you can actually do is just use the pot as a bit of an impromptu iron over the top of the surface there, so you can still wax this way, and it's just a little bit safer because you can direct the heat a little bit easier, and it does still melt the wax nicely. This method usually works best if you are able to find a nice flat surface. So if you're out and about, bench, something like that, or a nice flat piece of ground if you're desperate, or if, like us, you happen to find an ironing board out on Birch Common, works quite well. But that just allows you to melt the wax in nicely, and then at the end you can make yourself a nice cup of tea. I'm astonished at my own genius. This one is one that we have waxed. It's got about 3 layers of wax in it now, and then this trouser leg is one that has had about the same amount of water poured onto it, but this has got no wax in it at all. I intentionally keep these trousers unwaxed because I prefer the slightly softer feel. I've got other pairs of Fjällräven trousers that I keep waxed for using outdoors a little bit more, but these I prefer them to be a little bit softer handle, a little bit more comfortable. But you can really see the difference. So on this unwaxed one, you can see just how much the water has soaked through, whereas on the waxed one, the water is sitting there quite happily. It is still penetrating a little bit because, as I said earlier, this does not make the trousers waterproof by any stretch, but it will make them highly water resistant. And you can see there that it's beaded quite happily and is moving around. It's starting to seep in a little bit as it's sitting there a little bit more, but this one you would have a very wet leg. This one you'd still stay pretty dry. Now that you've got the general idea with waxing, we do have a few tips and tricks that you can use to improve the performance of your Fjällräven garments, and also just generally to improve your experience when you are waxing. A big one that most people could benefit from with Greenland wax is truly the adaptability of it. You can wax as much or as little of G-1000 items as you need to. So where you could really benefit from that most is with jackets, or potentially with trousers as well. But jackets are really the one that it's really easy to spot the difference, and that's by doing things like waxing or giving an extra layer of wax to the hood and shoulders of a jacket, and then leaving the rest of the jacket with maybe a lighter layer of wax or no wax at all to keep it a little bit more breathable. Because when we're out in adverse weather conditions, you usually find that rain will fall mostly onto our hood and shoulders, so you want those areas to be a little bit more protected. The other thing with the shoulders is that it will also protect the jacket a little bit more from abrasion when you're wearing a rucksack and a pack and things like that. Trousers can also benefit from varying degrees of wax inside the trouser. It's really easy to see on something like my Vida Pro trousers here because they've got the two-tone. What you can do is apply extra layers of wax where you want a little bit more protection. So on the seat is a classic area. If Mary Berry has taught us one thing, is that you don't appreciate a soggy bottom. So you want to give an extra layer of wax or two on the seat of the trousers. So if you do sit down on something that's a little bit soggy, that extra layer of wax will help keep your bum dry, because no one likes a soggy bottom. Moving over to the legs of the trouser, it can be worth putting an extra layer of wax over the knees if you're kneeling down, but it's also worth waxing along the bottom cuff and all of the lower section of the trouser just to act as a little bit more of a gaiter. Trousers do have a tendency, if you're walking through long grass, to absorb a little bit of moisture further down, and then a capillary action will send it up the trouser leg. One thing that you can do to help stop that is actually wax on the inside of the trouser leg as well. So turn the trouser inside out and apply wax to the inside as well here, and that will just really help with the overall weather resistance and keep your legs nice and dry. It can be worth applying a double layer of wax over stitching. It both helps with overall water resistance and repellency, but it also helps with durability because it just provides a nice smooth coating, so you're less likely to catch any of the stitching, and it just keeps the stitching in slightly better condition. Pockets and cuffs in this case, see a little bit more wear than other areas of trousers and jackets, so it can be worth applying an extra layer of wax there. It helps with the overall durability, but it also helps even out the colour because they're likely to fade a little bit more in those areas. So applying a layer of wax and then heating it back up will make the colour of the jacket nice and even again. One thing that we can't demonstrate today, mainly because I haven't got any tears, rips or holes in any of my G-1000 that I've got here, is that if you do manage to tear a hole in anything G-1000, it can just be stitched and patched back up, and then a good layer of Greenland wax over those stitch lines will help seal the jacket back up, and away you go. Whilst the main focus of this video was on waxing clothing, so jackets and trousers, you can wax any G-1000 item, be that rucksacks, gear bags, jackets, trousers, pretty much anything you can think of that Fjällräven has made in G-1000, you can wax. That about wraps up our deeper dive into Greenland wax and why you might want to wax your Fjällräven G-1000 items. Do want to say a quick shout out to our friends over at Goal Zero for supplying us with a Yeti power station so we could come out to Bircher Common and do this outdoors. Otherwise we'd been stuck in the filming room filming this, and we thought we'd show you somewhere a little bit nicer to do this and just prove that you can really wax your Fjällräven items wherever you are. Also, like a quick thank you to Fjällräven themselves, especially Jez, for sending us this rather lovely knitted jumper that I've been wearing over the course of this video, and just generally for being great and supplying us with things like Greenland wax and things like that. I'm going to carry on and continue waxing my trousers here because I might as well get a few more strange looks from some dog walkers, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.